Okay, hi everybody. This is Brennan Donnellan, Director of Marketing and Communications for the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association. I know that many of you watching have been sort of suddenly forced into the world of virtual law practice by the COVID-19, the changes that we're all feeling. I know that others of you have some experience with this and others of you have none, but we are here to help you. And when I say we, I mean our partners at Red Cave Law Firm Consulting. Jared Correa is here, and he has a presentation about, for even those who are not tech savvy, to understand the importance of turning your practice into a virtual practice, and especially as a necessity during these times. So Jared, you can take it away.
Thanks, I appreciate it. And we're all working from home, right? So if you hear some kids screaming in the background, those would be mine. As you just heard, I'm a business management consultant for lawyers. I've been doing that for the last decade plus. And in that time, I've consulted with probably 5,000 law firms. And so one of the things I did when this whole coronavirus thing came down and you started seeing quarantine orders, shelter in place orders, which we've had out here in Massachusetts, where I live, for the last 3+ weeks or so, I just decided that it would be good to offer a presentation like this to bar associations. So in the last probably 3 weeks or so, I've probably done 30 of these presentations for different bar associations. And this stems from conversations I've had with attorneys in my consulting practice and elsewhere, where when I ask people, are you virtual? Do you feel like you're ready to roll if you have to work from home, if you have to manage a distributed workforce? The answer is usually not an emphatic yes, but not really. So what I'm trying to do with this presentation is set you up to get started, to get more virtual. So whether you're starting flat-footed, whether you've got some foot in the cloud, maybe a toe in the cloud, I'm going to focus on 8 areas where you can get more virtual, more web-based as a practice. And then I'm going to give you 3 takeaways for each. So things that you can do today, things that you can do this week to be better prepared to deal with this whole quarantine situation, work from home situation for as long as it lasts. And I'm going to start with marketing, which I think is kind of an interesting way to do it rather than focusing on straight technology to start with. But I think that marketing and technology and legal is finally starting to coalesce. So I think there's a lot of useful technology options for lawyers in terms of marketing.
Hey, Jared, this is Brennan. If I can interrupt, I'm sorry. One thing I didn't say, and I think I neglected to say, is if you have questions during this, ask them in the chat, ask them in the Q&A.
Thank you. And I'm happy to take them as well. I'll answer questions during the presentation, and I'll stay on a little bit afterwards. If people have questions afterwards, that's fine too. So as I was saying, in terms of the marketing angle, I see a lot of law firms that are turning off intake because they're not really sure how to manage it in a situation like this. And that's problematic because you may not hit a trough in your practice in terms of revenue right away, but depending on the type of practice you're in, that might happen 6 months down the road, 9 months down the road, a year down the road. So assuming we're back to normal, like a year from now, all of a sudden you might get a massive income dip and you won't know why. And the reason for that is because you'd either shut off intake or reduced intake. So I don't want to see law firms doing that. I'd like to see law firms operate as if it was business as usual as much as possible. So that's kind of the genesis of this presentation. So let's get into it. First of all, a couple disclaimers. Number one, I am not a doctor unless you count Juris Doctor, and I don't in this case. So I know very little about the disease. I know very little about the public health implications. I'm just reading the news like you are. So I'm solely focused here on figuring out how to work remotely during a situation like this. Next, I know times are crazy out there, but no matter how much you need hand sanitizer, do not get hand sanitizer from this clown. Trust me. It's not worth it. All right, let's dive into the substantive stuff. Enough preliminary. So traditionally what has happened with lawyers and law firms is that they've always generated business from in-person relationships, right? About 90% of the law firms I talk to in the US, globally, they're generating business from in-person networking, referral marketing. And that's traditionally been the case for lawyers. And that works fine when you can get out and you can network with people and you can talk with them in person. But what happens when you can't? So this is out, right? We're not shaking hands anymore. We're not kissing babies. We're not going out there and generating referrals in the traditional ways that that's occurred. This is also out. You're not doing lunches anymore, right? How many lawyers rely on regular business lunches to generate business, to stay in contact with their referral sources? That's off the table for at least a month, maybe longer. And then there's this, conferences, also gone, right? So somebody like myself who runs a global consulting business, I generate a lot of work through conferences. So I go and speak at conferences. I do over 100 speaking engagements a year. I attend conferences to meet people. Lawyers will do CLEs, right? Or they'll attend CLEs. They'll get credit. They'll meet people. They'll make presentations. They'll increase their reputation that way. You don't have the availability or the ability to do that anymore. That's only happening online now, webinars like these, right? So how do you manage intake, marketing, client management in a situation like this? Well, let's start with a couple of tactics here, right? And no, I did not want to turn on the subtitles. So in terms of content marketing, this is the first place I would like to start. So now I'm from Boston. Let me quote our favorite coach, Bill Belichick. It is what it is. Content marketing is exactly what it sounds like. And now would be the appropriate time for you to make fun of me for Tom Brady leaving for Tampa Bay. Content marketing is a really valuable way to market your practice, and it has a significant effect on search marketing. And the advantage of this is that you're not necessarily going to have to pay for search marketing as you would in the traditional way that law firms do. So I want to break down a little bit how consumers find law firms and then why this is so effective. And if you don't know what content marketing is, or you don't necessarily understand what online content is, think of a blog. That's how lawyers have traditionally done this. So you basically get to publish your own articles in your own newspaper, right? So the way that lawyers have traditionally marketed themselves is they've been really good about building out their expertise, right? So when you're at a cocktail event as an attorney, when you're meeting referral sources, when you're publishing information about yourself online, the whole thesis is to make sure that people know that you're a really great lawyer, right? So you go to a lawyer's website, you see the super lawyers information, you see what their AVO rating is, you see whether or not they're Martindale Hubbell AV rated. Now, the thing about legal consumers is that they have no clue what a super lawyer is, but they can be darn sure that the super lawyer is better than an average lawyer, right? So that's what you do traditionally. You talk about what you do. If you're at a cocktail event and somebody says, well, what do you do? Well, you have your elevator pitch, right? If I ask you, what are the 10 most common questions your client have about your practice, right? Your potential clients have about your practice. You could tell me that in a snap of a finger. You know that stuff automatically. This is how you sell your practice. And in some cases, you're also talking about your niche expertise, right? So if you're an attorney who's an estate planning attorney, but you focus on special needs trusts, right? That's something you're going to communicate to people so that they know as a referral source or a potential client, if they have that particular need, you're the person that can help with that. Much easier to sell a niche practice, right? Because you're specializing in something. So the effect on search here is important. And all you're doing really when you're utilizing content marketing is you're converting that strategy to the web, and you're just building out content instead of speaking out content. So the reason this is good is because this is how consumers find lawyers now. So if you look at the trends that are in place right now, the referral mechanism that lawyers have traditionally relied on is not going away. It's not dead, but it's reducing in its effectiveness, right? So whereas consumers have traditionally relied on getting lawyers by utilizing referral sources who are other lawyers or other business people, they're still doing that, but more and more consumers are looking for referrals from family members, believe it or not. So when this whole thing finishes up and everybody goes back outside again, one of the things that you want to be doing when you're trying to reach out to consumers is becoming more active in your community so you can get those family referrals. You don't just want to be doing the bar events and the traditional events that lawyers have participated in. You want to be doing those things, yes, but you also want to be looking at community activities so you can get those family-based referrals. The other thing is that more and more consumers are doing independent research online. And there's a couple reasons for that. The first is that there's just so much information available. Somebody can go online and gain expertise in what it is that a lawyer does, make a more valid and informed choice about a lawyer than they ever have before. And the other thing is that that's not just the case within the legal market, right? This is how people search for referrals. This is how people search for services now, right? So somebody may just go to Google and search for an attorney, and there's other places they'll go as well, which I'll talk about in a second. And they're going to key in different terminology than you or I would, right? I'm an attorney, your attorneys. You use Westlaw, you use Lexis, you know what Boolean logic is, you know what keywords are. A lot of consumers are not that savvy and they don't necessarily understand how to run an effective search online, right? So what they're often doing is plugging in what's called long tail search. So instead of saying DUI lawyer, Canton, Ohio, which is how most lawyers market, right? If you look at the way most law firms who pay money for search marketing market, they pick those keywords out. And then what they do is they will optimize for those keywords, right? So if somebody types in DUI lawyer, Canton, Ohio, great, you're golden. But if somebody types in, I had a few drinks at the bar last night and I got arrested, what do I do? The term DUI doesn't appear in that search. The term drunk driving doesn't appear in that search. Operating under the influence doesn't appear in that search. Consumers don't talk that way, right? Consumers are not necessarily typing in personal injury. They're definitely not typing in torts. So if you can be found for those longer tail keyword searches that larger organizations, larger law firms that are paying tons of money for search results are getting, you can kind of sneak through the cracks here and get those clients who are not landing on those traditional keyword-based searches. And again, that number becomes larger and larger because more and more people are searching for lawyers independently online. So if you can create blogs and answer some of those questions, right, that's a helpful way to slide into those search results. So maybe somebody wants to know what they should wear to court if they have to go to court for the first time. You write a blog post on that, right? Maybe they want to know like the first step in a DUI trial. You write a blog post about that. So when they do these long tail searches and research, they'll be able to find you, or they're more likely to find you. Because remember, there are a number of factors in terms of Google search rankings and search rankings in general. Google's not the only search engine, but that's where most people go. Relevancy is a key factor. So the closer you can come to answering that specific question that that client has, the better. And I'm going to spin this out over the next few slides, but that's one of the things I want you to know to start with. So you want to be able to sell yourself in much the same way that you would in a referral context. And you're going to be doing that by creating content that answers specific client questions and posting it online. Again, we'll expand on that in a moment. So blogging is the traditional way that lawyers have done this, right? You set up a blog at your website, you start writing about it, take those client questions, answer them in 250 words or less, and write in a way that a layperson would want to read it, right? But there's so much content that you can produce now, and it's all free. Blogs are one, podcasts are another, video content is another that's really popular. If you look in terms of video content, like those get at least 10 times more clicks than text-based content. You could do presentations like this. You can do interviews. You do whatever you want online. You can have an Instagram account. You could post photos. Content is open to interpretation in the best way possible. You can push out tons of different content about your law practice and your services. So as long as you're answering the specific questions that clients have, you'll be all set to go, and you're uniquely situated to be able to answer those questions effectively, and in the first place to know what they are. All right, so what can you do today, this week, to be able to ramp up a little bit more in terms of online marketing that doesn't cost anything? One, create a blog. Again, this is the easiest way for lawyers to do this. They've been doing it this way forever. So if you have your own website that you manage, you're your own website designer, just add a blog to the website. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy to do. If that sounds complicated to you, you probably have a website designer that you work with, so ask them to add a blog for you. They may do it for free at this point in time. Next, define the top 3, not the top 10, the top 3 most common questions that your clients have, and write posts that answer those. So work that question into the subject of the post and then write about 250 words on it, again, as a layperson would do it. Last thing I want to say here strays a little bit from this, but it's connected. One of the places where lawyers can gain a ton of revenue where they generally lose it or don't gain enough is with existing clients and referral sources, right? You're relying traditionally on meeting somebody somewhere. Sometimes that's a chance meeting, sometimes that's a scheduled meeting, but you can't consistently schedule meetings with people and do that effectively across the board, right? It's much easier to reach 1,000 people online than it is to schedule 1,000 lunches, right? So what you can do is start to utilize your email lists to market to people. So most lawyers have pretty extensive lists of emails between clients, colleagues, referral sources, whomever, but they don't utilize those in any way. So what you can do very simply is take that email list, upload it to an email marketing tool like Constant Contact or MailChimp or iContact, something like that, and then start putting out email marketing. So you're drafting this content, right? You got blog posts, maybe you're doing a video here and there. What do you do with it? One of the things that you can do with it is email it out to people. Say, hey, check out my new video. Or, hey, I'm starting a newsletter that's going to come out every quarter. It's going to have content like this in it. Or you start a client alert that's a monthly thing. And you say, hey, every month I'm going to come out with something that's really useful and interesting to my clients. Now, the best part of this is that if you're using an email marketing tool and you've got less than 500 email addresses, it's going to be free to use that. It's not even going to cost you anything. And the idea is staying top of mind with people. Remember, everybody's overloaded with information. Everybody has the ability to access tons more information at their fingertips with a Google search. What you want to be doing is staying top of mind, staying present in their lives so that when they need to make a referral, when they have a legal need of their own, you're there and you're one of the top people they're thinking of. If you happen to send out an email newsletter the week that somebody's looking to hire a lawyer, then your chances of being that lawyer increase exponentially. So start sending that stuff out. Do it consistently. Traditionally, people have said that it takes 7 touches to get somebody to hire a service provider. It's more like 12 now, just because there's, again, so much information out there and available. All right, let's talk intake system. And then we're going to get into technology in more detail in a second. Most lawyers are bad at intake because they don't have an intake system to speak of, like no intake system at all. So traditionally, the way that potential clients have found law firms is through contact forms on websites, emails that they send to lawyers or staff, or also voicemail messages that they leave. Now, the problem with that is that's like a massive abyss to a web-based client, right? So I have a real issue that I want a lawyer to find and help me solve. So there are usually 2 types of legal consumers out there. One is the DIY client who wants to find out information about the legal service, but may want to do it themselves or may decide not to do anything. And then the next type of person is the client who is highly motivated to hire a lawyer. So the people who want to hire a lawyer are potentially really going to want to hire you. They're not, the tire kickers are not the ones you want, but those people who are going to engage with a law firm are far more likely to hire a lawyer. So if somebody's sending in a contact form, that means they want to hire you. If somebody's just reading your blog post and doesn't do anything other than that, they're more likely a DIY client. So how do you make the intake compelling to a potential client who, again, maybe is accessing a lawyer for the first time and doesn't know a whole lot about the legal system? If they send a voicemail and they don't hear anything for 5 days, they're going to go call 20 other lawyers. If they send in a contact form, there's no kind of response at all for a week, they're going to go hire another lawyer. Same thing with emails. If you don't respond to the email, you're not going to get that client back. There's going to be some level of engagement of some kind. And if you look at the speed at which potential clients want responses, studies have shown that 80% of legal consumers want to hear back from their potential lawyer within 24 hours. As many as 15% want to hear back from a lawyer within 3 hours. Now you may be saying, that's crazy. I can't sit by the phone and wait for my clients to call so I can pick up their call. Correct. So the key is engagement, right? And engagement has to be either a conversation or a next step, a call to action that the consumer can access, right? So can they schedule an appointment at your website? Is there a conversation that can exist between a real person or an automated service that's not you, so you can get the clients engaged in your system, get some level of response, get a next step in place without you having to spend time to have a conversation with them? If you can engage a client on that level, the numbers turn around. So 90% of the time, if you engage a potential client via your website, they're going to make a decision on whether or not they're going to hire you before they go to another law firm. So you get a full bite at the apple before that potential client is going to look at other law firms. So it's essential when you draw somebody in with your content, when you get them to your website, to engage them. And there's a lot of different tools that you can utilize to do that. There's virtual receptionist services. There's online scheduling programs. There's live chat. There's chat bots. Anything that can give somebody a response, allow them to set up a consultation, give them that next step, and allow them to access it, what they do is they settle back. They say, all right, I'm going to make a decision about this person before I talk to anybody else. And that is the situation you want to be in when you're marketing online. All right, so what can you do this week to improve your intake process or to build one to start with? First thing you want to do is make sure your existing intake forms work. Believe it or not, intake forms break on websites all the time. Law firms are sometimes not getting any new intakes. They don't know why. That's because their intake forms aren't functional. And if you wait 2-3 weeks, a month, 2 months to fix that, you're losing business. So in terms of the intake forms, test it out, see if it works. When I take on new consulting clients, often I'll just send a response via the intake form at their website, and I'll see how long it takes them to get back to me. Oftentimes they never get back to me. So if you have a website development person who's working on that, make sure they're staying on top of that. If that's something that you're working on, make sure that your intake forms are actually working so you're at least getting the information. And if you can add some kind of step, some kind of engagement, some kind of next level where the potential client can get to so that they feel a little bit more secure that your firm has engaged with them, do that as well. But start with the intake forms, make sure those are functioning correctly. Next, try a CRM. So CRM stands for Customer Relationship Management Software. And essentially what that means is a lead tracking software. So potential lead comes into your law firm, and then you can track everything you do with that lead. How many emails have you sent and when? How many phone calls have you made? Have you set up video conferences? Have you had an initial consultation? What that does is that allows you to aggregate data and to figure out how effective you are in closing potential leads. So if you can close 100% of your leads when you make 2 return phone calls, well, guess what? In every case, you should be making 2 return phone calls rather. Maybe it shows that when you email clients, that's not enough. They want a video conference as well. You can look at all this data and figure it out. And that's the power and value of a CRM. Some CRMs will also allow you to provide engagement options as well. So there's a lot of tools here in place. In addition to CRMs, as I talked about before, all these other services that you could potentially use to engage clients, like virtual receptionist service, chat systems, you can also integrate that with your CRM so you can have a streamlined intake process. Now, if you've never tried a CRM before to get that data and to figure out, like, is your client selection process really where it should be? Try one for free. There are a couple free CRMs that I would recommend if you've never tried one before. One is called Streak, Streak, and that is a Gmail plugin. So if you use Gmail, you can use Streak, the CRM, within Gmail for free. Another tool that's a standalone program that doesn't exist within an email platform is something called Agile CRM, Agile CRM. And that's a really robust free software. It's not going to cost you anything. You can have as many as 10 users on it. And it's a great way to track what you're doing. Lastly, add your next client without a face-to-face meeting and see how that goes. If it goes woefully, then you know what changes you need to make, and you'll see what holes you have. So let's talk about some of those changes. Right, this is probably the biggest slide in terms of like the marketing stuff that I want to talk about, which is conversion and payment. So as I said before, what you don't want to do is turn off your marketing, right? You don't want to turn off your intake. You want to make sure that you can keep clients coming in. So you need to do 3 things, essentially. One is any meetings that you would have had in person previously, you need to move those to the web. So we're on Zoom right now, right? You can utilize Zoom. Oh, are you guys seeing that subtitles notification? Sorry about that. Hang on. That would be annoying to me as well. Let's restart the presentation. All right. Hey, thanks for letting me know. Nobody wants to look at a subtitle setting all the time, right? I can't see it, so let me know if you can still see it. All right, conversion and payment. Let's get back to this. So online meetings. We're in a Zoom meeting right now, right? That's fantastic. Really easy to use, right? You logged into Zoom. It was pretty quick and easy. You can see video. You can hear me talking. I can share a document here. Somebody asked about Zoom security. I'll get to that in a moment. You've got Q&A. You can raise your hand. What you don't see is that there's an annotation feature here as well. So I could click on the annotation feature. I could draw lines. I could put an arrow next to something. I could circle it. Using a web conferencing software like this is really effective. And you can do anything that you want to do in an in-person meeting and an online meeting. And that's usually what I tell my clients. There's always a web-based equivalent for what you're doing in real life, and you can manage it online as well. And so there are a ton of web conferencing softwares, and I'm going to talk about security for that in a second. But the idea is that you want to replicate as much as you can with an in-person meeting online, and you can actually do a lot of that. The one thing that you can't do potentially right now, depending on where you are, and I'm not sure where this stands in Ohio, but a lot of states are issuing executive orders now where you can notarize documents online. If that's the case in your state, you can manage that. If it's not the case in your state, usually you're going to have to wait until everybody can get back in person, or you're going to have to make the choice to go out and meet with clients to get documents notarized. My hope is that most states are going to be allowing virtual notarization, but it's not the case in every state. Executive orders have not come out yet. So let's take a moment and talk about security. So we're using Zoom right now. The challenge with a law firm is that the thing about Zoom is, oddly enough, their chat is encrypted end to end, right? So the whole chat system is encrypted. The video is not. So that's a challenge in certain cases, right? So if you look at the state ethics rules on this subject, if you look at the legal ethics rules on this subject, and I'll talk more about that in the back half of this presentation, what most of those laws say is that you need to encrypt certain data, which is often collected as personal identifying data. So social security number, financial account number, state issued identification number, information like that. And also sometimes biometric indicators, which would be something that comes from somebody's body, right? Like a fingerprint or a voice recording. If you want to protect that data at a higher level, which in many cases is required via certain state laws and also with respect to HIPAA, then you need end-to-end encryption on the video as well as the chat. So in terms of end-to-end encryption, there's a lot of web conferencing softwares that offer that, where Zoom doesn't. One of which is FaceTime. If you use FaceTime, Apple, Mac, really good with security. FaceTime video chat has been end-to-end encrypted forever. There's something called Wire, W-I-R-E, which is also a very good on security web conferencing app, including end-to-end video encryption. Another option is called Signal, which is a open source software, so it's free, and that is end-to-end encrypted video chat as well. So most of the other stuff on Zoom you can fix. You've probably read a lot about Zoom bombing, right, where people just come into meetings. Well, Zoom is adjusting their features on the fly for that. So now you have to invite each attendee to a meeting. Nobody can just come into a meeting anymore without being allowed by the person who's hosting the meeting. But generally speaking, the issue with Zoom and lawyers in terms of security is that the video is not encrypted end to end. And those other options, those three options that I gave you, the video is encrypted end to end. So if that's something that you feel that you need to do in your practice, if you are dealing with those sensitive types of information, then that would be an alternative for you. But generally speaking, when you're looking at these softwares, they kind of look the same way. So they're definitely set up in the same way. You can utilize all these tools in the same fashion. So it's really helpful. Any other questions about video conferencing? I'm happy to answer those as well. The second thing is electronic signatures. So when your meetings move online, you're also not going to be able to take a piece of paper, slide it over to somebody, say, hey, sign my engagement agreement, right? You can show it to them, but you're not necessarily going to be able to get the signature. So if you're in a situation where you need electronic signatures, those are really easy to access and really cheap. And the good thing about it is that there's been an e-sign act on the federal government's books for years now. And essentially, e-signatures are the same as, just as legitimate as wet signatures or pen and paper signatures. So the way e-signature tools work, pretty straightforward. You upload a document into your system, and then you add fields, right? You add date fields, you add fields for somebody's name, company, title at that company. They just fill that in when they get the document. And then you put where you want the signature block to be. Somebody clicks on that, they type their name, and then you get a signature. You email that to them. You can send notifications on that are automated. It's not manual. And then you get into a position where you can just manage that pretty easily. So totally done via email. The documents are already paperless, really straightforward, and again, really cheap. In terms of electronic signatures, you're probably going to be paying something like less than $10 a month for a subscription like that. Some of the tools that are available on that front, I use Adobe Sign. There are also tools like Write Signature and DocuSign, which are very popular in terms of e-signatures, but that's fairly straightforward. Again, fairly easy to use, something that you can buy today and start using really easily. Last thing is e-payments, right? So you've got to collect money online now as well, because you're not going to send somebody to the bank. Let's say you're an estate planning attorney, you're not sending your elderly client to the bank to get you a check. And even in the best case scenario, you've got a position where you've got cashier's checks that you're asking people to get. They got to go to the bank. They got to have the money in their account. They got to sign that. They got to bring it back to you. There's like 17 steps to that. What that means is that you often get paid less regularly and less money, frankly. So the alternative to that is e-payments. So you can process all these payments electronically as well. You can process payments via ACH. You can process payments via a debit card. You can process payments via e-check, but you can also process payments via credit card. And that's where the real win is here. So in terms of credit card payments, you often get paid faster and you get paid more because it's easier to make those transactions, and also because people don't necessarily have to have that money in their account. So if you're asking somebody for a $5,000 retainer, they may have trouble getting that money into their account and transferring it to you. Like a lot of people just don't have $5,000 in their checking account, but they can make that payment with a credit card and then set up a payment plan essentially with the credit card company. A lot of lawyers have not traditionally used e-payments because there are payment processing fees attached to those. Every transaction, there's a 3% fee for the payment processing company. So that's a challenge for lawyers because they don't want to pay that, right? But if you look at the way these systems work, you're going to get paid more, you're going to get paid more quickly, and then you have less accounts receivable. So you're not going to be spending time and money collecting on those things. So in the main, you're making more money when you do e-payments than you are otherwise. So e-payments are a real value for law firms, even outside of a pandemic, but now they're essential to utilize. The other thing to be aware of in terms of e-payments is that if you're taking trust accounting payments, if you're going to be taking retainers, you want to make sure that the payment processing fee comes out of your operating account and not your trust account. Because if it comes out of your trust account, you're impermissibly taking some of that retainer, which you're not allowed to do. So if you're using a payment processing company that works exclusively in legal, like a LawPay or a LexCharge or a HeadNote, then they'll usually be able to manage that for you. So what can you do this week in terms of conversion and payment? So number one, test video conferencing, right? So try it out. It doesn't have to be Zoom. It can be any provider, but see how it is. Try it with your family. Test some of the features, and then you should be able to roll that out to clients pretty effectively. And instead of having an in-person meeting for initial consultation, you can move those to the web. Keep taking on clients in your practice. Buy an e-signature tool. It's going to cost you like less than $10 a month. That's easy win for law firms. Lastly, select an e-payment provider. I gave you 3 options. And now you've moved every aspect of intake into an online process. And you did it fairly seamlessly. And this is something, if you worked at it, you could achieve within a week's time, within a few days' time. One thing I didn't mention before is that if you don't convert someone, the thing is that most attorneys just let that alone and don't do anything with a non-conversion. Like if a client doesn't hire you or you decide not to work with a client, you want to send a non-engagement letter. But now you're not necessarily going to be sending a paper letter, right? Because you can also send that via email as well. So just make sure that you do that as well. All right, let's move on to social media, which is going to be the last marketing topic. Then we're going to get into more hardcore technology questions. Oh, Eric asked, what were those 3 e-payment providers again? Those would be LawPay, LAWPAY, LexCharge, LEXCHARGE, and then lastly, HeadNote, HEADNOTE. All right, let's talk briefly about social media, and then we'll get into like the more hardcore technology discussion for the last 20 minutes or so. Traditionally, isolation has been a problem for lawyers, which is exacerbated when we're talking about social distancing as a national concern, right? So if you look at the instances of alcoholism, suicide, depression for lawyers, it's far higher than for the general population. So it's important to be able to stay connected with people. And one of the best ways to stay connected with people when you're homebound is using social media. I will tell you personally that social media has been great for my business. Traditionally, I make a ton of referral relationships on social media that I would not have been able to make otherwise. And even for like a hyper local business, like a law firm, you can still find people as referral sources online. It's just a matter of like shifting the dynamic again. The things you were doing in person, you're now shifting to a web-based model. And social media, again, is a great place to meet people and to also broadcast your message. And we'll talk more about that in a second. But I'm not necessarily talking about like scrolling through people's status updates and seeing what everybody has to say about Donald Trump, right? I'm talking about potentially using messaging tools, video chat through these services. I know a lot of people are doing happy hours now on social media. That's a great way to keep yourself engaged with others when you're stuck at home. So one thing in terms of social media that's really important with respect to marketing is this notion of omni-channel marketing. So I talked before about how potential legal clients search for lawyers, right? You never necessarily know how they're going to find that information, though. So if you're content marketing effectively, you've got a blog, right, that publishes to your website, and then maybe you do an email newsletter like I talked about. But beyond that, what are you going to be doing in social media channels, right? So do you have a presence on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram? If not, you may be invisible to clients who want to get their information about service providers that way. Now, if you're a traditional law firm, you may be thinking no lawyer is ever going to be found via LinkedIn, but it totally happens, and it happens on a regular basis. And the reason for it is based on how consumers search for service providers. So if you look at the way people search now, like more than 65% of searches are taking place on mobile devices. The vast majority of those are phones. And when people are on phones, they're not necessarily going to a browser every time and going to a search tool, right? So they're not going to Chrome and then Google immediately. They're doing a lot of what's called in-app search. And when I talk about in-app search, what I essentially mean is that you've got people who are going directly to the Facebook app or the LinkedIn app. And while they're there, because that's how they consume most of their information, they say, hey, I need a lawyer for this. I'm going to start looking up lawyers. And if you don't have a business page or if you don't have a presence on those channels, you're invisible to those people. And again, because there are so many information sources, think of how you get information. There's probably 12 different places. Which one do you prefer? That's probably different than 12 other people's preferences. So the idea is that you produce content so that you can push it to other platforms, and so that whoever wants to get their information from a particular platform, there you are. And that's called omni-channel marketing. And the easiest way to achieve that is through social media tools, which are, again, free to use, free to post. And interestingly enough, if you wanted to get into advertising on social media, it's cheaper than traditional search engine marketing is by a wide margin. And it's also hyper localized. On Facebook, for example, I know a guy who does marketing for coffee shops in Boston. And all they want is the people from a particular building to come down for lunch every day. And so he can target his marketing on Facebook to a particular block of a city. It's unbelievable what you can do on a lot of these systems, and it's really cost effective. So one of the things that you should take away from this presentation is that if you're going to be marketing online, there's non-traditional ways to do that that are going to allow you to save a ton of money over the way that law firms have traditionally done that marketing. All right, so what are the things that you can do today to get a little bit more involved in social media? Number one, add one new social media account, personal or business account. So this is an easy one, right? If you have a Facebook personal page, add the Facebook business page. If you want to start doing videos, add the YouTube business page. It's a piece of cake to do this, really not going to take you a whole lot of time, maybe 2-3 minutes tops, honestly, if you're quick at it. And if you have to figure it out, maybe like 20 minutes, really easy to do, really doesn't take a lot of time. And again, it's going to spread your reach out pretty far. The next thing I would do is to schedule posts. So there are products out there that will allow you to schedule social media posts, which is a real time saver because it means you don't have to go in on a Tuesday at 2:00 to post something online, right? You can use tools like Hootsuite, Buffer, Raven tools. All these tools are free, and you're going to be able to schedule your content across various platforms from one dashboard, which is going to make it really efficient for you to do it. Last thing I would say on social media is try to make one new referral contact on social media this week. It's not going to be as hard as you think. All right, and I think we got a chat thing here. Oh, you're welcome, Eric. Okay, let's get into technology. So in terms of technology, some of the same issues exist with marketing. And it's not that you can't get out of the office to market anymore. It's that you can't get to the office anymore. And there's a lot of challenges related to that for lawyers because most traditional law firms are built around having a physical office space where people can congregate and share information. So, in the first instance, your office servers are not helping in this environment. So traditional law firms have physical office servers set up in their office space, and that's where the documents are shared. That's where the emails are shared. You may have a document server, you may have an email server, you may have even more servers than that. So what's happening is that as soon as you remove yourself from that office network, which is how those systems are traditionally built, you can't get at your information anymore. And that's obviously a massive challenge right now. So you're going to tell me, hey, I'll just use remote access. I'll remote into a device of some kind. Maybe it's my laptop, maybe it's my desktop at the office. There's a few challenges with that as well. A, it's going to take you more time to get that information because data is being transferred from one point to the other. And then because you're transitioning data from one point to the other, potentially unnecessarily, which we'll talk about in a second, that data is also unnecessarily exposed to hackers, right? That data doesn't have to be existing and being pushed from one space to the other. There are ways to access it directly, which I'll talk about in a second. But the challenge with remote access is partly that you're taking an unnecessary risk in terms of security because you're moving data from one spot to the other when you don't have to. Lastly, you're also depending on a physical device to be active and functional. And in some cases, that's a physical device that you can't get to or that's a challenge to get to. So if you're relying on remoting into a desktop at your office, what happens if the plug falls out of that desktop and you can't get it plugged back in, right? You would never know. And all of a sudden, you can't access any of your data in your law firm environment. This reminds me a lot of, like I said, I'm up in Boston. And when the Boston Marathon bombing happened, I was consulting with a lot of law firms in the city, and there were 16 firms at ground zero. 8 of them were able to operate in the cloud. 8 of them were not. And so what happened was as soon as that happened, and that's a federal disaster area now, nobody can get back into your office space. Those 8 firms that were able to operate in the cloud, they picked up, moved home, moved to a law library, and they were ready to go as if nothing happened. I think all the other firms closed down. So the other thing is sharing information, right? So how do you share information at this point when you're out of that office environment, when you're out of that office network? How do you get information to colleagues? How do you get information to clients? That all of a sudden becomes a challenge. And managing a distributed workforce is a challenge, right? Because now you've got 7 people who are no longer working in the same space. They're working in 7 different spaces. Lastly, paperless office, right? Can we not do the paper thing? Is it time to move to the paperless office? I think it is. I'll tell you a quick way to do it. All right, let's start with the cloud. I'm just going to explain it quickly what the cloud is because I think some people still have questions about this. So the cloud is essentially a terrible way to describe what is a remote server. So I think what people fail to understand in terms of cloud services is that there's always a physical endpoint for data. So there's always a server somewhere. It's just not yours. So when you're using the cloud, it's probably Amazon server or Google server or Microsoft server. And they exist in these giant server farms on each coast, right? So you've got a server farm in California. You've got a server farm in Virginia. If one of the coasts happened to fall into the ocean, you're still good. Your data is backed up redundantly. These are large buildings under armed guard, right? Sounds a little bit more secure than your server. So because you're renting space on these servers instead of buying them, you're saving the same costs that you would in terms of renting an apartment versus owning a home, right? So you don't have to have the space anymore to house your servers. You don't have to put the fans on the servers anymore. If your server breaks, you don't have to replace it. That's now Google's job. You don't have to hire IT people to manage the server, right? So you're saving tons of money when you're talking about moving to the cloud. You're getting rid of all these physical devices. Now, I wouldn't get rid of backup drives, by the way. I just want to say that quickly because the challenge used to be that I've got all this data in my office. How do I back it up to the cloud? Now the challenge is reversed, and it's almost like I've got all this data in the cloud. How do I get a physical backup of that back down to my office space? So keep the backup drives, but you can get rid of a lot of this hardware, including email and document servers. And the big advantage of the cloud is that it allows you to work from anywhere as long as you have a secure internet connection, because you're no longer accessing software from your computer or from a physical drive that you maintain. You're accessing it from a web browser directly via the internet. So what can you do to get up to speed on the cloud this week? First, buy a cloud-based productivity software. If you're using Microsoft Office still, the traditional version of Microsoft Office that sits on your computer at home, there's something called Microsoft Office 365, which is soon to turn into Microsoft 365. They're changing the name. Functionally, it does the same thing. I call this the gateway drug to the cloud for most attorneys because it's going to look and feel a whole lot like traditional Microsoft Office, except it's going to be available via the web. That means it's not going to live on your computer. You're not going to have to maintain it. You're not going to have those PST files anymore, right? It's going to be a lot easier to manage, and your computer is going to work a whole lot faster as well. Perhaps the best part of Office 365 is that with each account, you get to download on up to 5 devices the full traditional premise-based Office space. So if you don't like Word online, download the premise-based version of Word, and you have the advantage of everything still saving up to the cloud. So if you're feeling uncomfortable about the cloud, putting your information online, making sure it's secure, and I'll talk about security in a second, try Office 365. That's going to allow you to fall in love with the cloud. Next, upload some of your current client file folders into an online drive. So if you use Google, you're already using a cloud-based Office suite. And Google's also got something called Google Drive, which is a document or file repository. Microsoft has something called OneDrive, which is an online document or file repository. OneDrive also has a terabyte of data for free. Online storage also super cheap. So try to upload a folder to OneDrive. Try to upload a folder to Google Drive, Dropbox, whatever it is. See how much easier it is to manage files online than it is to manage traditional files on a desktop, right? Lastly, what I would suggest that you do is try to log into your systems via a web browser and see how that works. If it doesn't work well, then again, you can see what kind of holes you have in your virtual practice, identify those, and solve for them. And one thing I wanted to mention that I didn't is that a tool like OneDrive, for example, and Google Drive, which are document repositories online for your law firm, those are free tools. It's part of the cost that you're paying for these systems in the first place. So no additional money gets spent. And lastly, before we talk about file management, like if you're using the cloud, that means that you're always using the most up-to-date version of software. So you're not getting the update disk anymore. You're not waiting for that to come in the mail. You're not getting the new system in place on an annual basis. You always have the most up-to-date software available to you. That means you're going to be more efficient. And I'll talk briefly about efficiency in a second. Now, file management. If you're using, let's say, Office 365, for example, you've got Outlook in the cloud for your email. You've got OneDrive in the cloud for your documents, and you no longer have a physical server for either of those things. When you're talking about file management in the modern law firm environment, those files have to be in the cloud, so you have to get paperless. Now, getting paperless is a really easy thing to do, right? It's a 3-step process. Your documents, a lot of them are electronic already. So then you just have to pick one place to save them and then save them with a specific name. Create a naming convention of some kind for your law firm. Pretty straightforward. If you can't do that, you have to scan those paper documents in the first place, and I'll talk to you about how to do that in a second. So getting paperless is really that easy. And the problem with law firms is twofold. So they usually have a ton of places where they store their documents. I've seen law firms where I would say on average, law firms I talk to, they probably have their documents stored in 8 places. What you want is one place, one source of truth for your documents. Make sure your documents are saved in one spot. Everybody saves them in that spot. Everybody saves them in the same way. That's why you have naming conventions or a style guide for your law firm. Use that as your document hub. The paperless part is mostly getting over the lawyer mindset that lawyers like paper. Lawyers like to touch paper. Lawyers like to write on paper. This is traditionally a thing for lawyers. If you can get over that mindset problem, it becomes very, very easy to put your documents online. Then, if you've got your documents online, you've got your emails online, the problem with productivity software like Microsoft Office is there's not a relational database, right? So I can keep subfolders of emails for particular clients, but I can't associate documents with that, and I can't associate other information like task and calendar appointments with that. Like there's no one place for me to click to see everything like that. A law practice management software is a relational database. So these are systems which you've probably heard of where you can create clients or matters, and you can attach everything in that client or matter to the matter itself. So I can associate emails, I can associate documents, I can associate tasks and events, I can associate time and billing information, I can associate data from my CRM with my client file. So the advantage of a system like that is that I click on the client file, I see everything that's happened chronologically in the case, and I can access it from one dashboard. That makes you hyper efficient. The other thing that's really helpful when we're talking about sharing documents with staff, colleagues, clients, anybody really, is that you've got now two places to do that. So you've got a document repository like a OneDrive or a Google Drive. You can share documents directly out of that to clients, colleagues. You can do the same thing through a law practice management software through what they call client portals. So the way this works is you give somebody access to a document or a file, and they will create a specific login to your software, and they will enter the software to access the document. What that means is that all this software is encrypted, so the document always stays encrypted. You're not sending it via email through potentially 20 unencrypted servers and exposing your data unnecessarily to hackers, right? So utilizing this tool to share documents and information is a much more secure way to do it than the traditional way that law firms have done, which is emailing information to people. So what can you do this week to improve your file management capacity during the pandemic? Number one, buy the best scanner on the market. Okay, so if you ever want to be a business management consultant like I am, here's what you need to do. Tell people to buy the Fujitsu ScanSnap IX500, which is absolutely the best scanner on the market. Super easy to use, super fast. It also comes with a PDF conversion software for free. So buy that and you'll never look back. It's going to be about $400 and it's probably going to be the best purchase you ever make. So buy a really good scanner, and then anything that's not an electronic document already, convert it to PDF and make sure that you can render the text on that document using a function called OCR, which is built into the ScanSnap, and then save it to your one document repository. Next, create a paperless workflow. I know it sounds like a silly thing because it's so easy, right? Here's where we save our documents. Here are the naming conventions we use, but put that down as part of your policies and procedures manual, right? That will help you to get over this hump, this mindset of going paperless. Drop it into the policies and procedures manual. Lawyers love order. Lawyers love policies and procedures manual. You will follow it. Your staff will follow it, and you'll be truly paperless before you know it. The next thing I would say is demo 2 law practice management software systems. If you don't have one, if this is the first time you've heard somebody talk about it, try it out. A relational database is going to make you much more efficient. There are a ton of good products on the market. Clio, MyCase, Rocket Matter, FileVine, number of options to choose from. Just test it out, demo it, and see if you can become more efficient using a system like that. Looks like we got some questions. So Amy says, I'm using Dropbox. Do I need supplemental encryption like Sukasa to stay secure? In terms of Dropbox, if you have the business version of Dropbox, that data is encrypted. You don't necessarily need a second layer of encryption to make it more secure, but you could if you want to. It's really optional. If you look at the statutes, the rules on data protection, which I'll talk about in a second, it just says that that data has to be encrypted, and it's encrypted in the business version of Dropbox. So you don't necessarily need a secondary version of encryption. And Kelly says, can you please repeat the scanner name? Yes. So the scanner name is the Fujitsu ScanSnap IX500. The Fujitsu ScanSnap IX500. Thank me later. Okay. Data security. This is the last big topic I want to address, and I'll get you out of here at the top of the hour. I promise. So one of the reasons that lawyers have avoided the cloud, which you just found out is pretty awesome, right, is because they're wary of data security. So lawyers want 2 things. They want somebody to say, because you're using the software, you're safe. And they also want to make sure that there's no breach, right? They want somebody to guarantee that there's no breach of data. I have terrible news. Neither of those things are happening. There's not going to be a case where an ethics agency anywhere ever is going to say, hey, we're good with Google now and forever, because they can't predict what Google is going to do, right? And also, there's no way to guarantee breach is not going to happen to a business. And in all likelihood, a business is going to be breached. So if you look at the rules around the country for each state, basically they're talking about the same personal identifying data, which I discussed before. Basically, they're all saying the same things, which is that you need to be reasonably secure in what you do. And that reasonable security essentially means that you're looking for loopholes in your practice where your data could be breached, and you're covering for those as best you can. And then also, in the case that your data is breached, you have a plan of action to make sure that you remedy that breach as soon as possible. So you want to have a data security plan in place at your office, essentially. And different state laws talk about it in different ways, but that's essentially the components that we're looking for. And we got a chat question here, so I just want to make sure I get to it. Thank you guys for dropping in the link to the ScanSnap. Beautiful. All right, so this reasonable security notion, right? So there's a few things you want to be doing specifically. One is that you want to be vetting the software you're using. So you want to ask questions of these cloud-based vendors about their security, because there are some fly-by-night cloud-based vendors, right? So if you take a look at, there was a North Carolina bar ethics opinion that came out at the beginning of 2011. I think it was the 7th ethics opinion that year. And they listed 25 questions that you could ask of cloud-based vendors related to data security. That's something you should take a look at if you want a starting point. So essentially interview your vendors, see what they do in terms of security, keep a record of that, and then that's a reasonable thing to do as a business, a reasonable way to secure your business, right? And then it's mostly about encryption and passwords after that. So you want to make sure that the password protection in your office is strong. So you want to do two things. You want to have password policies in place. So how long does a password have to be? Does it have to utilize special characters? Does it have to utilize numbers? There are password protocols that you can set up, and that can largely be managed by technology, because believe it or not, most people's favorite passwords are still password 123. I think Beyonce got hacked a few years back because her password was her dog's name, all lowercase letters, and her dog's name was all over social media. The other thing you want to be doing with passwords is adding what's called a second factor of authentication. So in that case, not only do you need the password, but you're also going to get what's often a numeric code in your email that you then have to type into the system to get access to it. That's just another layer of security, because in many cases, like if somebody can access your password online, it's not also going to be the case that they have your phone and can look at that SMS text message to log into your system. And that's a required way to get into your program. So that's just another way to set up additional security, really easy to do. So make sure your password management is solid. The next thing is encryption, right? And we already talked a little bit about encryption. And by the way, if you want to know if a page is encrypted, just look at the URL. So the URL will either say HTTP or HTTPS. That S, believe it or not, stands for security, and that means that that page is encrypted. So if you're using those client portals, if you're using those document management systems, that data is going to be encrypted already, and you just need to invite somebody in to access that data, which will remain encrypted. It doesn't go anywhere. The challenge becomes if you're sending email, right? So if you're sending that personal identifying data via email, the challenge becomes how do you protect it when it goes through potentially a number of unencrypted servers? So what you need to do is either encrypt the email itself or encrypt the document. You can encrypt documents using Microsoft Word. You can encrypt documents using Adobe Acrobat. You can also encrypt documents using email systems and add-ons to those systems. So there's tools like Zix, Z-I-X, Reflexion, R-E-F-L-E-X-I-O-N, which will allow you to just encrypt data simply by typing in encrypt into an email text body, or setting up a system that will recognize certain rules for particular states. Really easy to use, really cheap, about $8 a month if that's something that you want to go with. But make sure that if you're sending that personal identifying data via email, that that's encrypted as well. So I think we got a chat here too. Let me just check this. Oh, just another link. Great. All right, got 1 minute left. So here's what I'll say. What can you do this week in terms of getting more secure in terms of your data? Number one, try to encrypt a document via 2 different methods if you haven't done it before. See if you can do it. Add a second factor of authentication to your email. Relatively straightforward to do this in Google or to do this in Microsoft Office. Try it. Next, share a document with a client or colleague via a secure method. And as I said, I am at the top of the hour, so let me just show you my contact info. If anybody's got any questions, feel free to reach out. I've got 2 email addresses you can reach me at. My phone number is right there. Thanks to the Ohio bars, the Metro bars, for letting me present today. If you guys are good with it, I'll stay on for a couple seconds if anybody's got any questions that weren't addressed. But otherwise, we can finish this up. But thanks again, and I hope this was helpful.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Jared. I think it was extremely helpful. It was packed with useful information. The participants should know this will be archived on Facebook as a post and as a video. And by this evening, it will be on YouTube as well. So on the CMBA YouTube channel or on our Facebook channel, if you want to go back, refer to this, watch it again. Tons of good information. Jared from Red Cave Law Firm Consulting, thank you very much.
Thanks.